The morning light crept gently through the lace curtains of Angela Brooks' kitchen, laying soft golden stripes across the wooden table, where a pot of grits steamed beside scrambled eggs. The radio hummed low with an old Sam Cooke tune, and her son Malik sat hunched over his homework, pencil tapping in rhythm. Angela, still in her apron from preparing the staff breakfast at the restaurant before sunrise, leaned against the counter with her coffee, watching him with quiet pride. He was 16 now, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, carrying both the weight of his father's absence and the fire of his mother's steady belief in him. "Eat before it gets cold," she reminded him, nudging the plate closer. He didn't look up from the paper. "Ma, you think I could get into Howard?" Angela's lips curved. It was the kind of question that both broke her heart and kept it beating. She set her cup down, came around the table, and tipped his chin up so his eyes met hers. "Baby, if you can dream it, you can work it. And if you can work it, nothing on God's earth can stop you." Malik smiled faintly, the stubborn hope of youth tucked beneath his seriousness. She kissed the top of his head before gathering her purse and keys. "Don't be late for school. And don't let anybody make you feel small, you hear me?" By mid-morning, Angela was at her restaurant, the Magnolia Room, a place that smelled of garlic butter, fried catfish, and fresh-baked cornbread. The floors gleamed, polished by her own hands years ago, and the walls held sepia photographs of black families from the neighborhood. Weddings, baptisms, barbershop portraits, church Sundays. It wasn't just a business. It was a shrine to survival, to joy carved out of hardship, to stories passed on like recipes. Though she was the owner, Angela tied on her apron and slipped into the role of waitress with ease. She had learned long ago that true leadership wasn't about sitting apart, but about standing alongside. She worked tables, bussed dishes, checked in with cooks, laughed with regulars. She listened, really listened. When people told her about their day, their worries about rent, their triumphs in school or work. Her staff adored her because she didn't just sign their checks. She protected them, mentored them, fed them when tips ran thin. Around noon, the lunch rush filled the dining room with a hum of conversation and clinking silverware. Angela balanced a tray of sweet tea glasses with the grace of someone who had been doing it all her life. She moved between tables, her presence both calming and commanding. Strangers sometimes mistook her for just a waitress, but those who knew her knew better. This was her stage, her ministry, her empire built brick by brick after years of working double shifts and saving every dime. In the quiet moments, she thought about her mother, who once cleaned houses for families who barely looked at her. Angela had promised herself she'd build something different, a place where people like her mother would be seen, heard, honored. And she had. But even now, even with a deed in her name and her bank account stable, she knew the world outside could still find ways to diminish her. That afternoon, as she refilled a pitcher of water behind the counter, she caught a reflection in the glass. Strong, tired, beautiful in a way life had weathered but not broken. She straightened her back and smiled faintly, ready for whatever the day might bring. What she didn't know was that before the sun set, her patience, her dignity, and everything she had built would be tested in a way that would shake the entire town awake. The Magnolia Room breathed with the rhythm of lunchtime. Forks clattered against plates, laughter rose in pockets across the room, and the kitchen doors swung like a heartbeat as servers hustled in and out. Angela moved through it all with the steady grace of a conductor guiding her orchestra, catching the eye of a server who looked flustered, sliding a plate into the hands of a runner at just the right moment, exchanging a soft word with a line cook whose hands trembled slightly from exhaustion. Every gesture was quiet reassurance. But even in that warm current of noise and comfort, Angela felt a familiar chill ripple through the air when he entered. Charles Whitmore strode through the double doors with the kind of presence that demanded space be made for him. His suit was sharp, a shade of blue meant to convey old money refinement, and his watch caught the light with a calculated flash. Two younger men trailed behind him, both in tailored jackets, both laughing at jokes no one else had heard. Charles didn't glance at the photographs on the walls, didn't breathe in the scent of gumbo that made the regulars sigh with nostalgia. His eyes swept the room with an ownership that wasn't his to claim. Angela had seen men like him before, men who thought politeness was beneath them, men who believed a smile was a kind of servitude. He walked as though the world bent around him. She had dealt with as kind as a waitress, as a businesswoman, even as a mother advocating for her son at school. She braced herself quietly, though no one would have seen it. Her smile never faltered. "Afternoon, sir," she said smoothly as he claimed a booth near the window, tossing his jacket across the seat without a glance. "Welcome to the Magnolia Room. Can I start you with something to drink?" Charles gave her a look, slow and dismissive, as if measuring how little she mattered. "Sparkling water. Not that cheap stuff either. And make sure the glass is chilled." "Yes, sir," Andrew replied evenly, jotting it down. His companion smirked behind their menus, glancing at it the way men sometimes did when they thought they were in on a joke. As she walked back to the counter, Angela caught snippets of their conversation. Land deals, investors, council members willing to play ball. The words tightened in her chest. She had heard rumors of a development project, one that threatened to swallow the neighborhood whole. But now, hearing it spill so carelessly from Charles's mouth, the danger felt closer, sharper. When she returned with the drinks, Charles was leaning back, eyes roving the room. "Funny little place you got here," he said, without asking for her name. "Surprised it's still standing, considering the changes coming through this part town. Can't imagine it'll last much longer." Angela set the glass down carefully, the condensation dampening her fingers. "We've been here a long time," she said softly, her voice even. "Folks around here like to think of it as home." Charles chuckled, a humorless sound. "Home? No, this is a pit stop. People don't want to eat with old photos on the walls. They want progress. Class. Something polished." His companions laughed too loudly, the sound clinking like broken glass in the air. Angela met his gaze, steady but calm, and for a brief second something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, at her refusal to shrink. He tapped his fingers on the table. "We'll see how long you last. Now, why don't you bring me the menu and try to keep up? I like efficiency." The room had gone quiet around them, not completely, but enough. Regulars noticed the way he looked at her, the weight in his tone. A couple at the next table exchanged a glance. The unease spread like smoke. Angela didn't flinch. She didn't give him the satisfaction of anger or retreat. She simply lifted her chin, her voice low but firm. "Of course. I'll take care of you." She turned to walk away, the muscles in her back tight, her jaw aching from restraint. She had promised herself she wouldn't let men like Charles define her, wouldn't let their words undo what she had built. But as she reached the menus, she felt it, the storm building. This wasn't just another entitled customer. This was the beginning of something bigger, something that would demand more than grace at a table. And the entire restaurant could feel it too. The lunch crowd had thinned slightly, but Charles Whitmore's voice filled the room as if he owned it. He snapped his fingers when his glass emptied, smirked when his companions chuckled too loudly, and commented on the food with the disdain of someone who had already decided nothing could impress him. Angela had seen difficult customers before, but something about the way Charles lingered over each insult, performing it almost, made her stomach knot. It wasn't dissatisfaction, it was spectacle. When she approached the table with their entrees, balancing the tray with practiced ease, Charles leaned back and looked her up and down as though she were an object, not a woman. "Took you long enough," he said loudly, so nearby tables turned. "I suppose this is a level of service people settle for around here." Angela set the plates down gently, refusing to let her hands tremble. "Your steak medium rare, sir. Shrimp and grits for you. Is there anything else I can bring?" "Yes," Charles said, his voice dripping condescension. "Someone competent." The words dropped like stones in water, rippling across the dining room. Conversations faltered. Forks hovered midair. The young server bussing nearby froze, unsure whether to move. Charles's companions laughed. The kind of sharp, mirthless laughter meant to draw blood. Angela's face remained still, her breath steady. She had been here before in different forms. A teacher questioning her authority at Malik's school, a banker speaking slowly to her as if she couldn't understand, a landlord years ago doubting her ability to pay rent despite her careful records. Each moment had taught her the same lesson. Composure was her armor, but Charles wasn't done. "This place is a joke," he declared, gesturing around. And you, serving tables at your age. Don't you people have any ambition? A gasp rippled from a corner booth. A woman with 2 children shifted uncomfortably. Angela's staff stared, waiting to see if she would bend or break. Angela placed a tray beneath her arm, her voice quiet but firm. Sir, I treat all my customers with respect. I ask that you do the same. The simple dignity in her tone cut sharper than anger ever could. For a moment, even Charles hesitated, but his pride couldn't allow silence. He pushed back on the table and stood, his presence towering, designed to intimidate. Respect. His voice rose, echoing across the room. You're nothing but a waitress. Don't lecture me about respect. I spend more on a single bottle of wine than you make in a week. If you had any real worth, you wouldn't be carrying plates for a living. The restaurant had gone silent now. Every set of eyes was on them. The air thick with humiliation that wasn't Angela's to bear, but that pressed on her nonetheless. Where's the manager? Charles barked. I want her fired. Right now. Places like this don't last because they let people like her run things into the ground. The security guard, a broad man in a dark jacket, hurried over from the front door, confusion on his face. He looked at Charles, then at Angela, and instinctively moved toward her. Ma'am, I think it's best if... Angela held her ground, though the words sliced through her. Best if she what? Disappeared? Bowed? Took blame for a man's cruelty just to keep the peace? She felt Malik's face flash in her mind, his question that morning. Do you think I could get into Howard? And she knew her answer had to be lived, not just spoken. Charles crossed his arms, triumphant, watching as the guard positioned himself between them and the rest of the room. That's more like it, he sneered. Escort her out before she embarrasses this place any further. Angela's fingers tightened around the tray. The photographs on the walls, the families, the churches, the laughter, seemed to watch her. Every face a reminder of why she built this place, why she fought to hold it. She inhaled deeply, her spine lengthening, and though the room waited for her collapse, she would not give it. Not here. Not now. Something shifted in her eyes, a calm resolve that spoke louder than rage ever could. If Charles Whitmore wanted to strip her of dignity in public, he was about to learn that dignity was the one thing she could never lose. The room hung in suspension, every breath caught between Charles's sneer and the security guard's uncertain stance. Angela could feel the weight of eyes on her, waiting to see what she would do, whether she would lower her head and allow herself to be ushered out of her own restaurant like an unworthy guest, or whether she would stand in a way that might shatter the illusion Charles carried with him. Angela set the tray gently on the nearest counter, the sound soft but deliberate, like a gavel in a courtroom. She wiped her palms against the apron tied at her waist, not from nerves, but to steady herself for what she knew must come next. Her voice was measured, even as she spoke, not to Charles, not to guard, but to the room. You want the manager, she said quietly, letting the words carry across the hushed tables. You're looking at her. A murmur rippled through the air. Charles laughed, sharp and dismissive, waving a hand as though swatting a fly. Don't insult me further. You're not even worth. Before he could finish, Angela untied her apron and laid it carefully across the counter. Without the fabric, she looked taller somehow, the weight of her true authority rising in her posture. She walked past the guard, who hesitated, confusion spreading across his face as she pulled a set of keys from her pocket. She crossed the manager's office door, the one tucked against the back wall, and slid the key into the lock with steady hands. The tumblers clicked, the door swung open, and the fluorescent light spilled across the dining room. A hush fell deeper. From inside, Angela retrieved a leather-bound folder. She brought it back to the table where Charles stood, smirking, arms crossed in arrogant anticipation. She laid the folder down flat, flipped it open, and slid the first page toward him. The seal of the county clerk's office gleamed at the top. Her name was printed in bold black letters across the deed, Angela Denise Brooks, sole proprietor of the Magnolia Room. You're standing in my house, she said, her voice calm but resonant, her eyes locked on his. The silence that followed was electric. The staff gasped softly, some covering their mouths, others smiling behind their hands. Patrons craned their necks to see, whispers cascading like wind through the dining room. The guard stepped back, his posture shifting as the truth settled into his chest. Charles blinked once, twice, as though struggling to process what he was seeing. His face flushed crimson, the confidence draining as quickly as the color rushed in. This doesn't mean. It means, Angela cut in, her voice firm yet without rage, that every brick, every chair, every plate in this building belongs to me. You came into my place, insulted my staff, and tried to have me thrown out of what I built with my own hands. Her words rang out like a sermon. You think service is weakness. You think humility is shame. But this apron, she held it up in her hands, isn't a mark of failure. It's a reminder that I don't ask of anyone what I won't do myself. That is dignity. That is strength. Something no money can buy. The crowd broke into applause, quiet first, then swelling until it filled the entire space. Staff members straightened taller, pride radiating in their faces. Even the young server who had frozen earlier now smiled with something like reverence. Charles shifted uncomfortably, his smirk dissolving into a grimace. His companions avoided his gaze, their laughter silenced. He opened his mouth to speak, but the sound was drowned out by the applause, by the affirmation of community that had chosen Angela's dignity over his wealth. Angela placed the deed back into its folder, closed it with precision, and tucked it beneath her arm. She looked at Charles one last time, not with anger, but with unflinching certainty. You wanted me out of here, but it's you who doesn't belong. And with that, she turned, not waiting to see whether he left, because she knew he would. The video surfaced that same evening. One of the diners, a college student with a phone always within reach, had captured the entire confrontation, from Charles's insults to Angela laying down the deed and declaring the restaurant her house. By the time Angela had locked up the Magnolia room for the night and tucked Malik into bed, the clip had already begun to pulse through social media. Within hours, it spread beyond the town's borders, carried by hashtags and captions that spoke louder than any press release. Black woman owns a room. Dignity is power. When respect walks in. Angela didn't know it yet, but her life had shifted. The next morning, when she arrived at the restaurant, there was a small crowd waiting outside. Neighbors, church friends, even strangers she had never seen before. Some clapped as she walked up the steps. Others held out hands to shake. A woman her mother's age, dressed in her Sunday best though it was Tuesday, touched Angela's arm and whispered, "You stood for all of us yesterday. Thank you, baby." Angela forced a small smile, though her chest swelled with something heavier than pride. She hadn't spoken for anyone but herself in that moment, and yet the weight of what it meant, for women, for black business owners, for every person who had swallowed humiliation in silence, settled on her shoulders like a mantle. Inside, the staff gathered around her, their eyes bright. The young busser from yesterday beamed. "Miss Angela, you're famous. They put you on the news. They're saying you made that man look like a fool." Angela exhaled slowly. "I didn't do it to make him look like anything. I did it because he tried to make me feel small in my own place. And none of us should ever let that stand." But even as she spoke, she knew the story had taken on a life of its own. By noon, a local TV crew stood outside the restaurant. Their van parked at the curb, a camera trained on the front door. They interviewed patrons who had been there, staff who had worked under Angela for years, and community members who came not for food, but for solidarity. Clips of her quiet declaration, "You're standing in my house," played on repeat across television screens and news feeds. And with the attention came questions. Reporters dug into Charles Whitmore's history, unearthing his family's long grip on local land and politics. Articles appeared about the proposed luxury development he was pushing, about the families who would be displaced. Angela's name became tethered to a wider fight, the struggle for black neighborhoods to survive gentrification, and the greed of developers who saw communities as expendable. Malik, scrolling through his phone that evening, looked up with wide eyes. "Ma, you're trending. Like, really trending. People are calling you a hero." Angela shook her head softly. "I'm not a hero, Malik. I just told the truth." "But the truth's all some people need to fight," he said, his voice firm with conviction of youth. That night, Angela sat in the quiet of her office after closing, the deed still resting on the desk where she had left it. Her hands hovered above it as though it were more than paper, as though it were the fragile heart of the community itself. She thought of her mother scrubbing other people's floors, of Malik's dream of Howard, of every employee who looked to her not just for a paycheck, but for proof that survival could be dignified. She knew then this wasn't just about her restaurant anymore. The world was watching. The community was rallying. And Charles Whitmore, his arrogance, his plans, his contempt, had given them all a face to fight against. The phone buzzed. It was a lawyer she hadn't spoken to in years, an old friend from college who now worked in civil rights. "Angela," the voice said, calm but urgent, "I saw the video. If you're ready to do more than own the room, I think we can own this fight." Angela leaned back in her chair, the shadows of the restaurant stretching long around her. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them with resolve. She hadn't asked for this battle, but it had come to her doorstep, and she wasn't about to let anyone else decide the fate of her house, her people, or her son's future. The Magnolia Room had become more than a restaurant. Within a week of the video, it was a gathering place, a headquarters of sorts. Church leaders, activists, young people with laptops and phones. They all came, crowding into booths and around tables, their conversations urgent, their eyes alight with possibility. Angela moved among them with the same calm presence she carried when serving a dining room. Only now the plates were petitions, zoning maps, and contracts. The hum of clinking silverware was replaced by the rustle of documents and the quiet intensity of strategy. Her old friend, the lawyer, arrived from Atlanta 2 days after the clip went viral. Vanessa King, sharp in her press suit but warmer in her smile, had known Angela since they were college roommates. Life had taken them down different roads, but the bond was still there, deep as marrow. Vanessa spread folders across a corner table, each one marked with tabs and color-coded notes. "Charles Whitmore isn't just rude," Vanessa said, adjusting her glasses. "He's dangerous. His family's been buying up property for decades. The plan is to level half of this neighborhood and replace it with luxury condos. You've seen the rents in those buildings. Folks around here couldn't touch them in 3 lifetimes." Angela nodded, though her stomach tightened. She had suspected, but hearing it laid out with evidence made it concrete, heavy. "So what can we do?" Vanessa tapped the papers. "First, we file a complaint with the zoning board. His proposals have holes, violations, conflicts of interest, backroom dealings. We put pressure on the council to slow approvals. At the same time, we gather stories. Families who be displaced, small business owners who be bulldozed. We get their testimonies recorded and public." Angela thought of the photographs on the restaurant walls, the families immortalized in sepia. She imagined those faces disappearing, their homes replaced by sterile towers no one from the community could afford. "We fight with their voices," she murmured. "Exactly," Vanessa said, "and with receipts." She lifted a folder fat with documents. Emails, contracts, deeds, all of it's dirty. If we build the case right, not only can we block this project, we can expose the whole network he's hiding behind. Malik, sitting at the edge of the meeting, leaned forward. "I can help with that. Me and my friends, we can run a digital campaign. Hashtags, videos, flyers online. People already know who you are, Ma. If they know what Whitmore's trying to do, they'll fight back with us." Angela looked at him, a swell of pride and fear rising in equal measure. He was too young to be pulled into battles like this. But his voice was steady, his eyes burning with conviction. "All right," she said softly, "but we do it smart. No lies. No noise for the sake of noise. Truth only. Promise me that." The next week unfolded like a carefully orchestrated plan. Families came into the restaurant to tell their stories on camera. Grandmothers who had lived in their homes for 40 years. Young parents who feared losing the only affordable daycare nearby. Shopkeepers whose livelihoods depended on the block's foot traffic. Angela sat with each of them, her hand often resting on theirs as they spoke, her presence steady as a pillar. Meanwhile, Vanessa drafted motions, citing every legal crack in Whitmore's proposals. Angela accompanied her to city offices, standing quietly but firmly as records were requested, eyes following her every step. Officials who once dismissed her now shifted in their seats, wary of the weight she carried. And the community's digital campaign, fueled by Malik and his friends, caught fire. Clips of testimony spread with hashtags like #OurHomesMatter and #MagnoliaStrong. Angela's name became not just a symbol of resistance, but a rallying cry. Charles, for the first time, felt pressure closing in. The man who once strutted into her restaurant now had cameras waiting for him outside his office. Reporters pressing questions about corruption. Residents holding signs with Angela's face beside the words. This is our house. Late one night, after the last meeting broke and the restaurant was dark, Angela sat at her desk, exhaustion pulling at her bones. She opened her journal and wrote, slowly, carefully, this fight isn't about saving walls. It's about saving roots. And roots don't move for storms. She closed the book and leaned back, staring into the shadows. She had not chosen this battle, but now that it was hers, she intended to win it. Not with rage, but with the strength of truth. And soon, she would have to face Charles Whitmore in the one arena where arrogance could not hide, the public square. The town hall pulsed like a pressure chamber that night. Every seat was filled, every wall lined with bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with anticipation and heat. Cameras lined back, red lights blinking like restless eyes. The council sat at their long wooden table beneath the seal of the city, papers stacked neatly before them, though their hands fidgeted nervously. This was no ordinary hearing. This was spectacle, judgment not only for a project, but for the soul of a neighborhood. Charles Whitmore entered like a man still convinced of his throne. His suit was immaculate, his tie a precise knot, his smile practiced for photographs. He shook hands with council members as if they were old friends, whispering in ears, leaning close, carrying himself with the gravity of wealth that had for generations been mistaken for authority. But his eyes betrayed him, darting too quickly toward the cameras, narrowing when he caught sight of the signs in the crowd. Homes not condos. Respect is ownership. And one in bold black letters. Angela's house, our house. Angela sat 3 rows from the front, hands folded on her lap, her deed tucked neatly in her bag. She wore no suit, no armor, but the quiet dignity she carried into every room. Malik sat beside her, his knee bouncing with nervous energy, but his eyes locked on her profile with reverence. Vanessa, sharp as ever, leaned close and whispered, "When it's time, we leave with the truth. Nothing more, nothing less." The gavel cracked. "We're here to hear arguments regarding the proposed Whitmore development project," the council chair announced. "Mr. Whitmore, you have the floor." Charles rose with the confidence of a man certain the outcome had already been bought. He spoke in flowing promises, new jobs, revitalization, progress. His voice rose with each buzzword, his hands gesturing broadly as though building towers in the air. He painted a picture of shining glass and bustling commerce, careful not to mention the families who would be displaced, the histories that would be erased. Applause rose from a small corner of supporters, but the rest of the room sat still, tense, waiting. When he finished, the chair cleared his throat. "And now we'll hear from the opposition." Angela stood. The room shifted. The murmur of recognition, the creak of benches as people leaned forward. She walked to the podium with unhurried steps, as if time itself bent to her pace. She placed her bag on the ledge, pulled out the folder, and opened it slowly, deliberately. "My name is Angela Brooks," she began, her voice calm, resonant, carrying without need of a microphone. "I was born in this town. I raised my son here. I built my business here, brick by brick, with the help of neighbors who became family. And I stand before you tonight because men like Mr. Whitmore believe people like us are invisible." She lifted the deed, holding it high enough for the cameras to catch. "This is proof of ownership. This restaurant is mine. But more than that, it belongs to the community it serves. And that's what's at stake tonight. Not just land, not just property, but dignity." The room erupted in applause, muffled by the gavel banging for order. Angela waited, unmoved, until the noise settled. Then she laid down her evidence. Emails showing bribes offered to council aides, zoning violations hidden under jargon, testimonies from families who would lose everything. Each piece hit the podium like a stone in a glass house. "Mr. Whitmore speaks of progress," Angela said, her eyes fixed on him now. But progress that erases people is not progress. It is theft dressed in silk. The crowd rose to its feet, clapping, shouting, chanting. Magnolia strong! Magnolia strong! Charles's smile faltered, his face slick with sweat as the camera swung toward him. The council shifted uncomfortably, caught between the weight of his money and the force of public outrage now roaring through the room. Angela's voice cut through the noise one last time. We are not disposable. Our homes, our businesses, our children's futures, they are not for sale. The gavel crack council members, their faces pale beneath the lights, cast their decisions. No, 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 the development was denied. The room exploded, a thunder of joy and relief. Malik threw his arms around his mother. Vanessa squeezed her shoulder, and the chants rose higher until the walls trembled with them. Angela stood steady in the center of it all, her eyes fixed not on Charles as he stormed out, but on the people who had stood with her, who had chosen truth over wealth, dignity over arrogance. For the first time, the town hall belonged to them. Yet again, but this time it wasn't to silence her. It was to call for vote. One by one, the night air was cool, carried with the smell of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Outside the town hall, people lingered long after the meeting ended, unwilling to let go of the victory that seemed to hang like electricity between them. Children chased each other through the clusters of adults, their laughter sharp against the hum of voices. Elders stood in small circles, nodding gravely, trading stories of battles fought long before this night. For once, the conversations did not drift toward what had been lost, but toward what could now be built. Angela stood on the steps, her hand resting lightly on the rail as though steadying herself against the weight of it all. Malik leaned against a stone pillar beside her. Exhaustion etched across his face, but softened by a smile that had not left since the vote was cast. He glanced at his mother, almost as if seeing her anew. You did that, he said quietly. You stood up there, and you didn't let them take us. Angela looked at him, her son now a man, her pride rise like a tide she couldn't contain. No, she said, shaking her head gently. We did that. Every single person who stood in that room tonight, who believed enough to fight with us, they made sure we weren't erased. Down on the sidewalk, Vanessa was already speaking to a local reporter, her sharp words now softened into something more hopeful. The cameras captured her, captured the crowd, captured the chants that still broke out in waves. Magnolia strong. Magnolia strong. And in that moment, Angela realized the story had already traveled beyond their town. Tomorrow, it would be on screens and front pages. People across the country would see what they had done, see that power could be challenged with truth and resilience. But victory carried with a shadow. Angela felt it even as she smiled, a heaviness at the edges of her chest. She thought of the years it had taken to build her restaurant, the nights of scrubbing floors until her hands ached, the mornings of rising before dawn to prep meals that fed not just stomachs, but spirits. She thought of every insult swallowed, every condescending glance endured, every quiet dismissal that had pressed her into invisibility. Tonight had given her back her voice, but the scars of silence still remained. As the crowd began to thin, Malik reached for her hand. Come on, he said. Let's go home. They walked back through Magnolia Street, past the shops with their shutters drawn, past the corner where the church bell tower rose against the night. Neighbors waved as they passed, some with tears in their eyes, others with fists lifted in celebration. And when they finally reached the restaurant, the heart of it all, Angela paused at the door. The sign above still bore its modest name, Angela's Place, the paint chipped from years of sun and storm. Inside, the tables were neatly arranged, the smell of spices lingering faintly in the air, as if waiting for the next day to begin. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and stood still, her hand resting on one of the chairs. This space had always been more than a business. It had been sanctuary, classroom, family table. Tonight, it had become a symbol. Malik walked in behind her, turned on a single light. The room glowed warm, soft, intimate. He pulled out a chair for her, as though she were a guest, and she laughed, a small, tired laugh, but full of love. You know, she said, settling into the seat. They thought they could take this from us because they believe money gave them power. But what we have, they'll never understand it. This place, its roots. And roots don't move easy. Malik nodded, sitting across from her. So what now? He asked. Angela thought for a long moment, the quiet of the restaurant wrapping around her like an embrace. Now, she said finally, we keep building. For the next generation. For every voice they try to silence. We keep standing. We keep feeding. We keep loving. Outside, the street was silent, but Angela could feel the echo of the chant still humming in the walls. Magnolia strong. She closed her eyes, letting the sound settle into her bones, into her legacy. And as she opened them again, she saw not just her restaurant, not just her son, but the future. Uncertain, yes, but no longer dictated by the whims of men like Charles Whitmore. Down on the sidewalk, Vanessa was already speaking to a local reporter. Her sharp words now softened into something more hopeful. The cameras captured her, captured the crowd, captured the chants that still broke out in waves. Magnolia strong, Magnolia strong. And in that moment, Angela realized the story had already traveled beyond their town. Tomorrow, it would be on screens and front pages. People across the country would see what they had done, see that power could be challenged with truth and resilience. But victory carried with it a shadow. Angela felt it even as she smiled, a heaviness at the edges of her chest. She thought of the years it had taken to build her restaurant, the nights of scrubbing floors until her hands ached, the mornings of rising before dawn to prep meals that fed not just stomachs, but spirits. She thought of every insult swallowed, every condescending glance endured, every quiet dismissal that had pressed her into invisibility. Tonight had given her back her voice, but the scars of silence still remained. As the crowd began to thin, Malik reached for her hand. "Come on," he said. "Let's go home." They walked back through Magnolia Street, past the shops with their shutters drawn, past the corner where the church bell tower rose against the night. Neighbors waved as they passed, some with tears in their eyes, others with fists lifted in celebration. And when they finally reached the restaurant, the heart of it all, Angela paused at the door. The sign above still bore its modest name, Angela's Place, the paint chipped from years of sun and storm. Inside, the tables were neatly arranged, the smell of spices lingering faintly in the air, as if waiting for the next day to begin. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and stood still, her hand resting on one of the chairs. This space had always been more than a business. It had been sanctuary, classroom, family table. Tonight, it had become a symbol. Malik walked in behind her, turned on a single light. The room glowed warm, soft, intimate. He pulled out a chair for her, as though she were a guest, and she laughed, a small, tired laugh, but full of love. "You know," she said, settling into the seat, "they thought they could take this from us because they believe money gave them power. But what we have, they'll never understand it. This place, its roots. And roots don't move easy." Malik nodded, sitting across from her. "So what now?" he asked. Angela thought for a long moment, the quiet of the restaurant wrapping around her like an embrace. "Now," she said finally, "we keep building. For the next generation. For every voice they try to silence. We keep standing. We keep feeding. We keep loving." Outside, the street was silent, but Angela could feel the echo of the chant still humming in the walls. Magnolia strong. She closed her eyes, letting the sound settle into her bones, into her legacy. And as she opened them again, she saw not just her restaurant, not just her son, but the future, uncertain, yes, but no longer dictated by the whims of men like Charles Whitmore.